Thunder's massive hooves clawed desperately at the fresh earth, blood seeping from torn flesh as the 2,000-pound Brahmin bull pawed frantically at what everyone believed was Deputy Danny Morrison's grave. The funeral had been proceeding with military precision until Thunder lunged at the polished mahogany casket, his anguished bellows cutting through the crisp Texas morning like a knife through silence. The bronze coffin wasn't supposed to be empty. Martha Morrison collapsed against her walker, her weathered hands shaking as mourners scattered in confusion. Sarah Morrison pressed both hands to her pregnant belly, watching in horror as Thunder's amber eyes blazed with an urgency that made veteran cops step backward. The American flag draped over the coffin was now streaked with crimson paw prints, but Thunder wouldn't stop digging. "Get that bull under control!" Sheriff Bradley shouted, but Thunder fought every restraint, circling the grave with purpose that chilled everyone watching. "Open it!" Sarah suddenly commanded, her nurse's instincts overriding grief. "Open the coffin now." If Danny wasn't in that grave, where was he? And how much time did they have left? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Morrison Ranch had weathered 5 generations of Texas storms, but nothing had prepared it for the quiet devastation that began 5 years ago when Danny Morrison came home from Afghanistan. Martha Morrison remembered the day her grandson returned, hollow-eyed and jumping at every sound, a Purple Heart in his duffel bag, and wounds deeper than any medal could honor. "Some boys come back from war different," Martha had told her neighbor, watching Danny pace the porch at 3 in the morning. "My Danny came back broken." The ranch sprawled across 847 acres of prime Texas hill country, its red barn and weathered farmhouse a testament to American determination. Great-grandfather Morrison had built it with his bare hands in 1923, and every generation since had added their sweat to its foundation. But medical bills from Danny's treatment were eating away at the family legacy faster than drought could kill cattle. That's when Thunder arrived, a 3-day-old Brahmin calf whose mother had died during a difficult birth. Danny found him shivering in the dawn cold, more dead than alive, and something in those frightened amber eyes spoke to the broken soldier's heart. "Gonna bottle feed a bull?" Martha had asked, watching her grandson cradle the tiny calf like a baby. "Somebody's got to," Danny replied, and for the first time since his return, his hands weren't shaking. Sarah Morrison had fallen in love with Danny twice. Once when they were high school sweethearts, and again when she watched him nurture Thunder through those first fragile weeks. The gentle giant who emerged stood 6 feet at the shoulder, weighed over 2,000 pounds, and possessed an intelligence that unnerved visitors. Thunder could open gates, recognized vehicles by sound, and somehow always knew when Danny was having a bad night. "That bull's got more sense than most people I know," Martha would say, watching Thunder position himself between Danny and whatever spooked him. By the time 8-year-old Jake came along, Thunder had appointed himself the family's unofficial guardian. The massive bull would lie in the shade while Jake climbed over him like playground equipment, never moving a muscle that might harm the child. When Danny became a deputy sheriff 3 years later, Thunder's protective instincts extended to the entire community. But their peaceful world began fracturing 18 months ago when Victoria Blackstone arrived in her black Mercedes, designer heels clicking against the ranch's wooden porch. Blackstone Development Corporation wanted the Morrison land, all of it, for a luxury resort that would bring prosperity to the region. "My great-grandfather's bones are buried in this soil," Martha had told the elegant woman with ice-blue eyes. "This ranch isn't for sale at any price." Victoria's smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind her gaze. "Everything has a price, Mrs. Morrison. Sometimes we just haven't found it yet." Now, 18 months later, as Thunder clawed at an empty grave while Danny lay buried alive somewhere in the Texas darkness, that price was becoming devastatingly clear. The trouble began 48 hours before Thunder's desperate digging, when Jake Winters disappeared like morning mist over the Colorado River. Winters, a former Blackstone development accountant, had been scheduled to testify about irregularities in the company's land acquisition practices. His empty apartment told a story of interrupted breakfast and abandoned hope, coffee still warm, eggs congealing on the plate, and a manila envelope marked "Insurance" hidden behind his refrigerator. Deputy Danny Morrison stood in Winter's kitchen that Tuesday morning, Thunder waiting patiently in the patrol car outside. The bull had insisted on coming along, which wasn't unusual. What troubled Danny was Thunder's behavior. Ears constantly swiveling, nostrils flaring, that low rumble in his chest that meant danger somewhere close. "Easy, boy," Danny murmured through the open car window, but Thunder's amber eyes remained fixed on something Danny couldn't see. The envelope contained photocopied documents that made Danny's blood run cold. Bank transfers, forged signatures, intimidation payments, a paper trail leading directly to Victoria Blackstone's personal accounts. Winters hadn't just discovered corruption. He'd documented a systematic campaign to terrorize rural families into selling their land for pennies on the dollar. That evening, Danny spread the documents across his kitchen table while Sarah prepared dinner and Jake practiced spelling words in the living room. Thunder pressed his massive head against the window, watching the driveway with unusual intensity. "This is big, Martha," Danny told his grandmother, showing her bank statements that proved Blackstone had been manipulating property assessments. "Victoria's been buying off county officials, falsifying environmental reports, even staging accidents to scare families into selling." Martha's weathered hands trembled as she examined the papers. "Lord have mercy." "My neighbor Hank Patterson, they said his well was contaminated, made him sell for next to nothing." "According to this, they contaminated it themselves," Danny said grimly. "Winters has proof." Thunder's bellowing outside made them all freeze. The bull was standing rigid in the pasture, staring down the county road where headlights had appeared in the distance. But instead of approaching, the vehicle stopped just beyond the property line and sat there, engine idling in the darkness. "That's been happening all week," Sarah said quietly, pulling Jake closer. "Different cars, same pattern. They just watch." Danny's hand instinctively moved to his service weapon. "Pack a bag for you and Jake. Stay at your sister's in Austin until this blows over." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah protested, but the fear in her voice betrayed her bravado. "And I'm not losing my family over this." Danny's voice carried the authority of a man who'd survived Afghanistan and wouldn't back down from corporate bullies. "Thunder and I can handle ourselves." The next morning, Danny decided to take the evidence directly to the FBI field office in Austin. He'd called ahead, spoken to Agent Patricia Chen, arranged a noon meeting. Thunder seemed agitated during their morning routine, refusing his grain and pacing the fence line like a caged predator. "You're acting like we're heading into combat," Danny told the bull, scratching behind his ears the way Thunder loved. "It's just a drive to the city." But Thunder's instincts proved sharper than human logic. The ambush came at 10:47 a.m. on a lonely stretch of County Road 412, exactly where Danny should have expected it. The old limestone quarry where cell service died and witnesses were scarce as honest politicians. The first shot took out his front tire, sending the patrol car spinning into the ditch. Danny's military training kicked in as he rolled from the vehicle, weapon drawn, scanning for threats. But there were too many of them. Professional men in tactical gear who moved with the precision of former military contractors. "Deputy Morrison," a calm voice called from behind an abandoned bulldozer. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." "Evidence of your boss's crimes?" Danny shouted back, already knowing this conversation would end badly. "That belongs to the people of Texas." The tranquilizer dart hit him in the neck before he could react, the world tilting sideways as his knees buckled. Through fading consciousness, he heard boots approaching, voices discussing logistics with the casual tone of men disposing of garbage. "Make it look good," someone said. "Hunting accident. Happens all the time out here." They dragged his unconscious body to the old storm cellar hidden in the mesquite thicket, a relic from the quarry's operational days, its concrete walls thick enough to muffle screams and deep enough to hold secrets. As Danny's patrol car was driven away to be staged elsewhere, miles from where he actually disappeared, the last thing he remembered was the sound of metal doors slamming shut above him and the weight of Texas earth being shoveled over his makeshift tomb. 20 miles away, thunder began bellowing like his heart was breaking, a sound that carried across the hill country and chilled everyone who heard it. The bull knew something terrible had happened to his partner, and somewhere in his magnificent brain, he was already planning a rescue that would test the very limits of loyalty and love. 24 hours after Danny Morrison vanished into the Texas wilderness, Thunder's behavior escalated from restless to frantic. The massive Brahman bull hadn't eaten, hadn't rested, and refused all attempts at comfort from Martha or Sarah. He paced the fence line like a caged tiger, his normally gentle demeanor replaced by an urgency that made the other cattle nervous. "Something's wrong with Thunder," 8-year-old Jake observed, watching from the kitchen window as the bull circled the barn for the 100th time. "He keeps looking down the road like he's waiting for Daddy." Sarah's heart clenched at her son's innocent words. Danny had been scheduled to return from Austin the previous evening, but his cell phone went straight to voicemail and the FBI office claimed he'd never shown up for his appointment. Sheriff Bradley had promised to investigate, but Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. Another cop who'd wandered off duty, probably nursing his PTSD at some roadhouse bar. "Thunder knows," Martha said quietly, her weathered hands gripping her coffee cup. "That bull's never been wrong about danger, not once in 5 years." The official search began at dawn with Sheriff Bradley's reluctant cooperation. Deputy Mike Johnson led one team toward the interstate, while Danny's fellow veterans formed another group to check the back roads. But Thunder had his own plan, and it didn't involve waiting for human authorization. When Martha opened the barn door to feed the horses, Thunder bolted past her with surprising agility for his massive frame. The 2,000-pound bull galloped down the county road with purpose, his hoofbeats thundering against asphalt like cannon fire. Sarah grabbed Jake and jumped into her pickup truck, following at a distance as Thunder led them on the strangest search party in Texas history. "Where's he going, Mama?" Jake asked, pressed against the passenger window as Thunder turned off the main road onto a barely visible dirt track. "I don't know, baby," Sarah whispered, but something in her nurse's training told her to trust the bull's instincts. But Thunder knows things we don't. The old quarry had been abandoned for 15 years, its limestone walls slowly being reclaimed by mesquite and cedar. Thunder stopped at the entrance, his massive head turning left and right as he tested the air. Then he began to bellow, a sound so mournful and desperate that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's where Daddy is," Jake said with the absolute certainty of childhood. Thunder found him, but the search teams couldn't see what Thunder sensed. To human eyes, the quarry appeared empty except for rusted equipment and weeds. Sheriff Bradley arrived 20 minutes later, his patience clearly wearing thin as he watched a bull apparently having a breakdown in the middle of nowhere. "Sarah, I know you're worried," Bradley said gently, "but we can't organize a search based on what a bull thinks he smells." Thunder responded by walking directly to a patch of disturbed earth near the quarry's edge. He began pawing at the ground, then digging with his hooves, throwing dirt and rocks with increasing desperation. Other searchers gathered around, some snickering at the absurdity of following livestock. But Martha Morrison had seen enough of Thunder's intelligence to know better. "Somebody get shovels," she commanded with the authority of a woman who'd buried 4 husbands and wasn't about to lose her grandson. "That bull's trying to tell us something." The digging began reluctantly, more to humor the distraught family than from any real belief. But 18 inches down, Deputy Johnson's shovel struck metal with a hollow clang that silenced every skeptic. Thunder's bellowing intensified as they uncovered a storm cellar door, its rusty hinges protesting as strong hands pried it open. The smell hit them first: stale air, fear, and the metallic scent of blood. Sarah pushed past the men, her nurse's training overriding protocol as she descended into the concrete chamber with a flashlight. Danny lay crumpled against the far wall, his uniform torn and his breathing shallow but alive. "He's here!" Sarah screamed, her voice echoing off the chamber walls. "He's alive! Someone call an ambulance!" Thunder's response was immediate and profound. The massive bull, who had maintained his frantic vigil for over 24 hours, suddenly collapsed to his knees as if all the strength had drained from his enormous body. His job was done. He'd found his partner, brought help, completed the mission that had driven him beyond exhaustion. As paramedics worked to stabilize Danny, extracting him carefully from his underground prison, Thunder struggled to his feet one more time. The bull approached the ambulance on unsteady legs, pressing his massive head against the vehicle's side as if trying to sense Danny's condition through the metal. "Easy, Thunder," Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the local veterinarian, said softly as she examined the exhausted bull. "You did it, boy. You saved him." But even as Danny was rushed to Austin General Hospital, even as the investigation began into his disappearance and the evidence he'd died trying to protect, Thunder's ordeal was far from over. The stress of the search, the emotional trauma of nearly losing his partner, had triggered something deeper in the bull's physiology, something that wouldn't become apparent for weeks, when Thunder's extraordinary intelligence began flickering like a candle in the wind. For now, though, there was only relief and the knowledge that love, whether between human and human or human and animal, could move mountains or, in this case, guide a desperate search to one specific patch of Texas earth where hope had been buried alive. The 3 months following Danny's rescue should have been a time of healing and justice, but instead they brought a slow-burning dread that settled over the Morrison Ranch like fog over the Colorado River. Danny's physical recovery progressed steadily, broken ribs mended, dehydration resolved, and the gash on his forehead healed to a thin scar. But the psychological wounds ran deeper, and Thunder seemed to be absorbing every ounce of his partner's pain. Dr. Patricia Vance, Danny's therapist at the VA hospital, had warned the family about secondary trauma. Animals, especially intelligent ones like Thunder, can mirror their owner's emotional state, she explained during one of their weekly sessions. The bull saved Danny's life, but the stress of that experience may have lasting effects on both of them. At first, Thunder's changes seemed minor. The massive Brahman bull, who once greeted every sunrise with enthusiasm, now required coaxing to leave the barn. His appetite diminished, and Martha noticed he'd lost nearly 100 pounds despite her best efforts to tempt him with his favorite treats. "He's not sleeping either," Sarah observed, watching Thunder pace the pasture at 2 in the morning. "I hear him moving around all night like he's standing guard." The legal proceedings added another layer of stress to the family's ordeal. Victoria Blackstone had been arrested based on Jake Winter's evidence. The accountant had been found alive but traumatized in a private facility outside Dallas, but her high-powered attorneys were mounting an aggressive defense. The case against Blackstone Development Corporation was slowly unraveling as witnesses recanted their statements and evidence mysteriously disappeared from police custody. "Money talks louder than justice in this county," Sheriff Bradley admitted during one of his visits to the ranch. "Victoria's got half the courthouse on her payroll, and the other half are too scared to stand up to her." Danny's frustration with the system was eating him alive. The man who'd survived Afghanistan and 18 hours buried alive was being defeated by legal technicalities and corruption. His nightmares returned with a vengeance, and Sarah often found him sitting in Thunder's stall at dawn, both man and bull staring into space with haunted eyes. "We're losing them both," Martha confided to Father O'Brien during his weekly visit. "That bull carried all of Danny's pain during the war, and now he's carrying this too. I don't know how much more his heart can take." The first serious warning came during a routine veterinary check in November. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes had been Thunder's vet since he was a calf, and she knew every quirk of his magnificent physiology. But the blood work that came back from the lab made her call the family immediately. "Thunder's showing signs of chronic stress syndrome," she explained, her usually calm voice tight with concern. "His cortisol levels are dangerously elevated, and there are inflammatory markers that suggest his immune system is compromised." Sarah translated the medical jargon with a nurse's bluntness. "His body is eating itself from the inside out." The financial pressure was another weight threatening to crush the family. Danny's medical bills from his kidnapping ordeal weren't fully covered by insurance, and Thunder's specialized veterinary care was expensive. The ranch that had supported 5 generations of Morrisons was hemorrhaging money faster than they could earn it. "We might have to consider Victoria's offer," Martha said one evening, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "The medical bills alone are going to bankrupt us." Victoria Blackstone's latest proposal had arrived by courier, a buyout offer for 3 times the ranch's assessed value, with the stipulation that all legal proceedings would be dropped. It was blood money, and everyone knew it, but desperation was making the impossible seem reasonable. Thunder's condition worsened as winter approached. The bull who had once been able to open gates with his massive head now struggled with the simple latches. His coordination was deteriorating, and sometimes he would stand motionless in the pasture for hours as if lost in his own body. "It's neurological," Dr. Hayes confirmed after another round of tests. "The stress of Danny's disappearance, combined with his genetic predisposition to certain conditions, has triggered what we're seeing. His brain is essentially aging at an accelerated rate." The diagnosis hit the family like a physical blow. Thunder wasn't just sick, he was losing himself piece by piece. The brilliant bull who had learned to distinguish between family members' vehicles, who had never forgotten a kindness or a threat, was slowly fading into confusion. Christmas morning brought a moment of cruel hope when Thunder seemed to rally. He ate a full breakfast, responded to his name, and even managed a weak nuzzle when Jake wrapped tinsel around his horns. For a few precious hours, it felt like their Thunder had returned. But by New Year's Eve, the regression was undeniable. Thunder no longer recognized Sarah's voice, walked in circles for no apparent reason, and had begun making sounds. Low, mournful calls that seemed to echo from some deep well of confusion and pain. "He's calling for something," Martha said, listening to Thunder's vocalizations from the kitchen window. "Or someone, like he's lost and trying to find his way home." The veterinary consensus was devastating when it finally came. Dr. Hayes consulted with specialists at Texas A&M and the University of California, sharing Thunder's test results and behavioral assessments with the country's leading experts in bovine neurology. "Thunder has developed a rare form of stress-induced encephalopathy," Dr. Hayes explained during a family meeting that felt like a death sentence. "The trauma of Danny's disappearance triggered a cascade of neurological damage that's now irreversible. His cognitive function will continue to decline and eventually—" She didn't need to finish. They all understood that eventually Thunder would forget everything that made him Thunder. His family, his purpose, his love for Danny. He would become trapped in a body that no longer recognized friend from foe, comfort from threat. The cruelest irony was that Thunder's sacrifice to save Danny had ultimately doomed him. The stress hormones that had driven him to dig for 24 hours straight, the emotional trauma of nearly losing his partner, the months of hypervigilance watching for new threats, All of it had accumulated into a neurological poison that was slowly destroying the most extraordinary mind any of them had ever known. "How long do we have?" Danny asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Weeks, maybe a few months if we're lucky," Dr. Hayes replied. "But Danny, you need to understand. Thunder's quality of life is deteriorating rapidly. Soon, he won't know who you are. He'll be frightened and confused, and there won't be anything we can do to comfort him." The unspoken question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. When do you say goodbye to a friend who saved your life? When do you make the ultimate decision for someone who can no longer make it for himself? Outside the kitchen window, Thunder stood alone in the pasture, his massive frame silhouetted against the Texas sunset. For a moment, he seemed to sense their conversation and turned toward the house, his amber eyes reflecting the dying light. In that fleeting instant, Sarah thought she saw a spark of the old Thunder, the gentle giant who had raised himself from an orphaned calf to become the heart of their family. But the moment passed and Thunder turned away, resuming his aimless wandering as darkness settled over the Morrison Ranch like a shroud of impending loss. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a February morning when ice coated the ranch roads and the wind howled through the barn rafters like a banshee. Sheriff Bradley's voice was tight with urgency as he spoke into Danny's groggy ear. "She's out, Danny. Victoria Blackstone escaped during transport to the courthouse. 3 guards dead and she's got help." Danny was already reaching for his service weapon before his feet hit the cold floor. "How long?" 6 hours, maybe more. The transport van was found burned out near Killeen. Professional job. Military precision." Bradley's voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much violence in his 30 years of law enforcement. "Danny, they think she's coming for you." Thunder's bellowing from the pasture confirmed what Danny's instincts already knew. Even in his declining mental state, the massive bull could sense danger approaching like a storm front. His calls weren't confused wandering now, they were warnings, urgent and primal. "Get Sarah and Jake to the safe house," Danny ordered, pulling on his boots as Sarah appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face pale with understanding. "Now!" "I'm not leaving you again," Sarah protested, but her hands were already moving, gathering clothes and essentials with the efficiency of a woman who'd lived through too many emergencies. "Last time I let you face this alone, we almost lost you. Last time I didn't know what I was up against." Danny checked his weapon, muscle memory from Afghanistan taking over. "This time, Thunder and I are ready." The family scattered like leaves before a hurricane. Martha refused to leave the ranch. "Buried 4 husbands in this ground, and I'll be damned if some corporate witch runs me off now." But she agreed to stay in the reinforced storm cellar with their hunting rifles and enough supplies for a siege. Sarah and Jake reluctantly drove toward Austin, though Danny could see in his wife's eyes that she would circle back the moment the immediate danger passed. Thunder's condition made the approaching confrontation even more heartbreaking. The bull's neurological decline had accelerated in recent weeks, but some primal instinct still burned bright in his failing mind. As Danny prepared defensive positions around the ranch, Thunder positioned himself between the house and the access road, his massive frame trembling not with fear, but with the effort of focusing his fragmenting consciousness on one final mission. "Easy, boy," Danny whispered, running his hands along Thunder's neck. "One more time, partner. Just like old times." The attack came with the pre-dawn darkness, when visibility was poorest and defenders most vulnerable. Victoria Blackstone had learned from her previous failures. No half measures this time, no attempts at subtlety. She wanted Danny Morrison dead and his family destroyed, and she'd hired the kind of men who specialized in making people disappear permanently. The first indication of trouble was Thunder's change in posture. The bull's head snapped up from his confused grazing, ears forward, nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. His bellowing took on a different quality, not the aimless calls of recent weeks, but the focused warning system that had saved the Morrison family countless times over the years. "Contact," Danny radioed to the sheriff's department, watching through his rifle scope as dark figures moved through the mesquite thickets. "Multiple hostiles approaching from the south pasture." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic weapon fire erupted from 3 directions, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness like deadly lightning. Danny's military training kicked in as he returned fire from his position behind the barn, but he was outnumbered and outgunned by professionals who'd come prepared for war. Thunder's response was magnificent and terrifying. Despite his neurological condition, despite months of declining cognition, the massive bull charged toward the gunfire with the fury of a locomotive. His war cry echoed across the hill country as he crashed through fence lines and scattered the attackers who'd underestimated the protective power of 2,000 pounds of motivated Brahmin. "Jesus Christ!" one of the mercenaries screamed as Thunder bore down on his position. "Nobody said anything about a bull!" But Victoria Blackstone was already moving toward the house, using the chaos of Thunder's charge to mask her approach. She appeared on the front porch like a vengeful ghost, her designer clothes replaced by tactical gear, her once perfect hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. The pistol in her hands was steady, professional, aimed directly at Danny's center mass. "Deputy Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying across the gunfire with chilling calm. "Time to finish what we started." Danny emerged from cover, his own weapon trained on the woman who'd tried to bury him alive. "Victoria, thought you might show up eventually." "You destroyed everything," she said, and for the first time Danny heard the raw pain beneath her composed exterior. "My father built an empire, and your stubbornness brought it all crashing down. Do you know what it's like to watch everything you love turn to ash?" "Yeah," Danny replied, thinking of Thunder's deteriorating mind, of Sarah's tears, of Jake's nightmares. "Actually, I do." The standoff stretched for eternal seconds, 2 damaged people facing each other across a gulf of violence and loss. In the distance, Thunder continued his rampage, scattering mercenaries like leaves while confusion clouded his magnificent eyes. The bull, who had once been able to distinguish between friend and foe, was now operating on pure protective instinct, striking at anyone who threatened his territory. "He's magnificent," Victoria said, watching Thunder demolish a $1,000 piece of tactical equipment with casual violence. "Even dying, he's still protecting you. My father never had anything that loyal." "Your father was a criminal who got people killed," Danny said. "Thunder's a hero." Victoria's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Heroes die, deputy. That's what makes them heroes." The confrontation might have ended in mutual destruction, but Thunder's intervention changed everything. The massive bull, bloodied and exhausted from his rampage, suddenly appeared between Danny and Victoria. His amber eyes, clouded with neurological damage, fixed on the woman with the gun, and something flickered in his failing mind, recognition, perhaps, or simply the ancient instinct to protect the herd. Thunder's charge was his last great act of heroism. Despite his confusion, despite the misfiring neurons that scrambled his thoughts, he understood that the woman with the weapon meant death for his family. His massive frame collided with Victoria Blackstone like a freight train hitting a sparrow, sending her flying across the porch as her gun spun into the darkness. But the effort cost him everything. Thunder collapsed immediately after the impact, his neurological system finally overwhelmed by the stress and violence. As Danny rushed to subdue the stunned Victoria, he could hear Thunder's labored breathing, see the confusion returning to those once brilliant eyes. "Thunder!" Danny called out, but the bull who had answered to that name for 5 years no longer seemed to recognize the sound. He struggled to his feet, blood streaming from a dozen wounds, and began wandering in circles, making the lost, mournful sounds that had haunted the ranch for weeks. Victoria Blackstone lay motionless on the porch, her back broken from Thunder's final charge. As sirens wailed in the distance and the surviving mercenaries melted away into the Texas darkness, she looked up at Danny with eyes that held no defiance, only the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd spent years running from grief. "I just wanted my father back," she whispered, tears mixing with blood on her face. "I just wanted someone to pay for what happened to him." Danny knelt beside his fallen enemy, his training as a deputy overriding his personal feelings. "Your father made his own choices, Victoria. This didn't have to happen." But Thunder was making sounds now that chilled Danny's blood. Not the aggressive bellowing of battle, but the confused, frightened calls of an animal lost in his own mind. The bull wandered past them, no longer recognizing the man he'd just died to protect, his magnificent intelligence finally and irreversibly shattered by the neurological storm that had been building for months. As paramedics and sheriff's deputies swarmed the ranch, as Victoria Blackstone was loaded into an ambulance that would take her to a lifetime in prison, Danny Morrison knelt in the dirt beside his dying partner and felt his heart break into pieces that would never fully heal. The weeks that followed Victoria's capture should have brought peace to the Morrison Ranch, but instead, they delivered the cruelest chapter in a story already heavy with heartbreak. Thunder had survived the final confrontation, but the magnificent bull who had charged into battle to save his family was gone, replaced by a confused giant who no longer recognized the people he'd spent 5 years protecting. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes delivered the devastating prognosis with the gentle professionalism that had made her the most trusted veterinarian in 3 counties. "The stress of the attack triggered a massive neurological event," she explained to the family gathered in the barn, where Thunder lay on a bed of fresh hay. "Combined with the underlying condition, his cognitive function has deteriorated beyond recovery." Danny knelt beside Thunder's massive head, watching those once intelligent amber eyes track movement without recognition. The bull who had learned to open gates, who had distinguished between family vehicles and strangers' cars, who had somehow known exactly where to dig to find a buried man, that Thunder existed now only in memory. "He doesn't know us," Jake whispered, his 8-year-old voice breaking as Thunder flinched away from the boy's gentle touch. "He's scared of me, isn't he?" Sarah pulled her son close, her own tears falling onto Jake's hair. "He's not scared, baby. He's just lost. Like he's in a dark room and can't find the light switch." The practical realities of caring for a 2,000-pound animal with severe neurological damage were overwhelming. Thunder could no longer feed himself reliably, often forgetting to swallow or becoming confused by the presence of food. He wandered aimlessly around the pasture, sometimes for hours, occasionally walking into fences or buildings as if he couldn't understand what they were. Martha Morrison, who had seen birth and death cycle through the ranch for 75 years, watched her grandson's agony with the stoic acceptance of someone who understood that love sometimes required impossible choices. "That bull gave everything for this family," she said quietly, her weathered hands steady as she helped Danny coax Thunder to drink water. "Question is, what do we owe him in return?" The answer came in fragments over the following days, each more heartbreaking than the last. Thunder began having episodes where he would bellow in terror at his own reflection in the water trough, not understanding that the face looking back was his own. He stopped responding to his name entirely, and sometimes would stand motionless for hours, as if his mind had simply gone elsewhere. Dr. Hayes visited daily, monitoring Thunder's condition with the dedication of someone who'd helped bring the bull into the world as a 3-day-old orphan. Her medical notes painted a grim picture, Patient shows progressive cognitive decline, spatial disorientation, and increasing episodes of distress. Neurological damage appears irreversible. He's suffering, she told Danny during one of their private conversations away from the family. Not physical pain. We can manage that with medication. But the confusion, the fear, when he can't understand where he is or who these people are around him. Danny, that's a kind of suffering we can't fix. The weight of the decision settled on Danny's shoulders like a crushing load. This was the bull who had saved his life, who had pulled him back from the darkness of PTSD, who had charged into gunfire to protect his family. How do you repay that kind of devotion? How do you choose between prolonging life and ending suffering? Sarah found him in the barn at 3 a.m, sitting in the hay beside Thunder, who was having another episode of confused bellowing. The massive bull had backed himself into a corner and was calling out as if trying to summon help that would never come. "He's calling for someone," Danny said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Maybe his mother or Chen, his first partner, or maybe just the Thunder he used to be. But there's nobody left to answer. Sarah sat beside her husband, watching Thunder struggle with demons only he could see. "Dr. Hayes thinks it's time, doesn't she? She says it's not about time anymore. It's about mercy." Danny's hands shook as he reached toward Thunder, who flinched away from the touch he'd once craved. "God, Sarah, how do I make this choice? He saved my life. How do I end his?" The conversation that followed was one of the hardest either of them had ever endured. They talked about quality of life, about dignity, about the difference between giving up and letting go. They remembered the Thunder who had been brilliant, gentle, fiercely protective, and faced the reality of what he had become. "He wouldn't want to live like this," Sarah said finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "The Thunder we knew was proud, intelligent, purposeful. This confusion, this fear, it's not living, it's just existing." Jake's reaction was the most devastating. When they explained the situation in terms an 8-year-old could understand, his immediate response was denial, then bargaining, then the kind of pure grief that only children can express. "But what if he gets better?" Jake pleaded, his small hands clutching the halter Thunder no longer recognized. "What if tomorrow he remembers us again?" "Sometimes love means letting go," Martha told her great-grandson, her voice carrying the wisdom of 7 decades of ranch life. "Thunder fought the good fight, honey. Now it's time for him to rest." The decision once made brought a strange kind of peace. Dr. Hayes scheduled the procedure for the following morning, explaining the process with clinical gentleness. Thunder would be sedated first so he wouldn't experience fear or confusion. Then, surrounded by his family, he would slip away as gently as possible. "He won't suffer," she promised. "It will be like falling asleep, and this time he won't have to wake up confused." That final night, the Morrison family held vigil in the barn. Thunder had a rare moment of calm, lying quietly in the hay while they took turns saying goodbye to the bull who had been so much more than livestock. Danny told stories of their first meeting, of bottle-feeding an orphaned calf who would grow into a giant. Sarah sang the lullabies she'd hummed while brushing Thunder's coat. Jake drew pictures of Thunder wearing a superhero cape because in the boy's mind that's what Thunder had always been. "Thank you," Danny whispered into Thunder's ear as dawn approached, "for everything, for saving me from the war, for finding me in that hole, for protecting our family. You were the best partner a man could ask for." Thunder's eyes, clouded with neurological damage, seemed to focus on Danny's face for just a moment. His tail twitched once, not quite a wag, but perhaps a ghost of recognition. Then the moment passed, and Thunder turned away, lost again in the maze of his failing mind. As the sun rose over the Morrison Ranch, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, a family prepared to say goodbye to the most extraordinary soul any of them had ever known. Thunder had given them everything: his strength, his intelligence, his unwavering loyalty, and finally, his life. Now they would give him the only gift they had left: the mercy of a peaceful ending to a story that had been nothing short of heroic. The morning Thunder was scheduled to be put down, Victoria Blackstone made a confession that shattered everything the Morrison family thought they knew about their 5-year ordeal. Paralyzed from the waist down and facing life in prison, she had nothing left to lose and everything to atone for when she asked Sheriff Bradley to arrange one final meeting with Danny Morrison. "There's something you need to know," Victoria said from her hospital bed, her once imperious voice reduced to a whisper. "About Thunder. About why he was so extraordinary. About what my family did to yours long before I was even born." Danny sat beside the woman who had tried to destroy his life, Thunder's peaceful euthanasia postponed by this unexpected revelation. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened a leather portfolio filled with documents that would rewrite the Morrison family history. "My great-grandfather, Charles Blackstone, didn't just develop land in this county," Victoria began, her eyes fixed on papers yellowed with age. "He was obsessed with creating the perfect livestock, animals that were stronger, smarter, more useful than anything nature had produced. In 1952, he partnered with your great-grandfather to develop a revolutionary breeding program." The first document was a contract between Charles Blackstone and Samuel Morrison, dated March 15, 1952. It outlined an ambitious project to crossbreed Brahman cattle with a bloodline that had been imported from India, bulls that local legends claimed possessed almost supernatural intelligence and loyalty. "The program was successful beyond their wildest dreams," Victoria continued, watching Danny's face as he absorbed the implications. "They created a bloodline of cattle that were not only physically superior but cognitively advanced. Thunder wasn't just intelligent by accident. He was the product of 70 years of selective breeding for enhanced mental capacity." Martha Morrison, who had joined them despite her age and the emotional toll of the morning, studied the breeding charts with growing amazement. "Great-grandfather Samuel always said his bulls were special," she murmured, "but this explains so much about Thunder's behavior." The second revelation was even more devastating. Victoria pulled out medical records from a private facility in Switzerland, documents that detailed her father Richard Blackstone's final years. The man who had supposedly committed suicide over the failed Morrison land deal had actually been suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's disease. "My father wasn't killed by business failure," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "He was losing his mind, making increasingly erratic decisions, borrowing against assets that didn't exist. The Morrison land deal was just his last desperate attempt to save a company that was already doomed." Danny felt the weight of 15 years of misdirected vengeance settling around them like dust. "So he didn't kill himself because we wouldn't sell. He killed himself because he couldn't bear the thought of forgetting everything he'd built, everyone he loved. In his final letter, the real one, not the one I showed everyone, he begged me to forgive him and to take care of the special bloodline he'd helped create with Samuel Morrison." The third document was Richard Blackstone's actual will, hidden for 15 years in Victoria's desperate need for someone to blame. In it, he left his entire fortune to establish a foundation for the protection and study of the enhanced Brahman bloodline, with the Morrison Ranch designated as the primary sanctuary. "I destroyed the will," Victoria admitted, her voice breaking completely. "I was 18, grieving, and I wanted someone to suffer the way I was suffering, so I blamed your family for everything and spent the next 24 years planning revenge against people who had never wronged me." The final revelation came from veterinary records that Dr. Hayes had been asked to review. Thunder's neurological condition wasn't random. It was a genetic vulnerability that affected the enhanced bloodline. The same genes that gave these bulls their extraordinary intelligence also made them susceptible to stress-induced cognitive decline. Thunder's breakdown wasn't just from trauma, Dr. Hayes explained when she arrived with additional test results. His bloodline is genetically predisposed to this condition. The remarkable intelligence comes with a cost. When these animals experience extreme stress, their enhanced neural pathways become unstable. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Blood tests revealed that Thunder wasn't dying from irreversible brain damage. His condition was a rare form of stress-induced catatonia that could potentially be treated with a combination of medications that had only recently become available for veterinary use. The neurological damage we thought was permanent might actually be reversible, Dr. Hayes said carefully. There's a new treatment protocol being developed at UC Davis specifically for this genetic variant. It's experimental, expensive, and there are no guarantees, but Danny's heart stopped. But there's a chance? A small one. Maybe 20%. The treatment would require months of intensive therapy, constant monitoring, and even if it works, Thunder might never be exactly the same, but he could potentially regain recognition, basic motor function, possibly even some of his original intelligence. Victoria Blackstone, paralyzed and facing life in prison, made an offer that stunned everyone in the room. My personal fortune, everything I have left, I want to fund Thunder's treatment, and I want to transfer my father's foundation to the Morrison family, as he originally intended. Why? Danny asked, suspicious after years of deception. Because Thunder represents everything pure that I tried to destroy, Victoria replied. He's the living embodiment of my father's dream and your family's legacy. If there's any chance to save him, to honor what our families built together before I poisoned it with my hatred, then that's what should happen. The decision to attempt the experimental treatment transformed Thunder's death sentence into a desperate gamble for recovery. As Thunder was carefully transported to the UC Davis Veterinary Medical Center, as specialists began the complex process of treating his unique neurological condition, as the Morrison family began to understand that their bull was not just a beloved pet, but the culmination of 70 years of careful breeding, the true scope of their ordeal became clear. Victoria Blackstone had spent half her life destroying something beautiful that her own family had helped create. Now, broken and paralyzed, she was offering everything she had left to heal the damage she'd caused. It was a redemption story written in medical charts and bank transfers, but most importantly, in the slim hope that Thunder might one day again recognize the man who had bottle-fed him as a calf and loved him as a son. 2 years after Thunder's experimental treatment began, the Morrison Ranch hummed with life again, though the scars of their ordeal had transformed into something deeper and more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The red barn that had once echoed with Thunder's confused bellowing now rang with children's laughter and the gentle sounds of healing. Thunder stood in the morning pasture, his massive frame casting a long shadow across grass still wet with dew. The experimental neurological treatment had been partially successful. While he would never again possess the extraordinary intelligence that had made him legendary, he had recovered enough cognitive function to recognize his family and find peace in their presence. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, but his amber eyes held a contentment that spoke of a soul finally at rest. "Good morning, boy," Danny said softly, approaching with Thunder's favorite breakfast of sweet grain and molasses. The bull's tail swished once in acknowledgement, and he nuzzled Danny's shoulder with the gentle affection of an old friend who had traveled through hell and found his way home. Jake, now 10 years old and tall for his age, climbed carefully onto Thunder's back, a privilege the bull allowed only him. "Tell me again about the time Thunder found you buried underground," Jake requested, though he knew the story by heart. "Thunder was just being Thunder," Danny replied, watching his son settle into the groove between the bull's massive shoulder blades. "Sometimes love gives us strength we didn't know we had." The ranch bore little resemblance to the struggling operation it had been 3 years earlier. Victoria Blackstone's fortune, transferred through the Richard Blackstone Foundation, had not only saved the Morrison land but transformed it into something unprecedented, a sanctuary and research facility for the enhanced Brahmin bloodline that had produced Thunder's remarkable intelligence. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes now served as the facility's chief veterinarian, overseeing a program that studied and protected the genetic legacy that two families had unknowingly created together. The pastures held a dozen bulls and cows descended from Thunder's lineage, each displaying varying degrees of the enhanced cognitive abilities that made them so special. "The bloodline is stable," Dr. Hayes reported during the monthly foundation meeting held in the ranch's converted barn. "We've identified the genetic markers that create the enhanced intelligence, and we've developed protocols to minimize the stress-induced neurological complications that affected Thunder." Sarah Morrison, now 6 months pregnant with their second child, served as the sanctuary's director of family services. Her background as a nurse had proven invaluable in developing care protocols that addressed both the physical and emotional needs of the remarkable animals under their protection. "These bulls form emotional bonds that are almost human in their complexity," Sarah explained to visiting researchers from Texas A&M. "They grieve losses, celebrate reunions, and demonstrate problem-solving abilities that challenge our understanding of animal consciousness." Martha Morrison, now 77 and officially retired, spent her days in a rocking chair on the front porch, watching great-grandchildren play in the yard where she had once feared losing everything. Her weathered hands moved constantly, knitting blankets for the new baby and scarves for the winter volunteers who came from around the world to study Thunder's remarkable family. "Never thought I'd live to see the day when scientists would come from 3 continents to study our bulls," Martha mused to Father O'Brien during one of his weekly visits. "Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" The transformation extended beyond the ranch boundaries. Victoria Blackstone, serving her life sentence at the federal prison in Fort Worth, had become an unlikely advocate for animal welfare and restorative justice. Her memoir, The Redemption of Thunder, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds funding similar sanctuary programs across the country. "I spent 24 years consumed by hatred for a family that had never wronged me," Victoria wrote in her final chapter. "Thunder taught me that intelligence without compassion is just sophisticated cruelty, while love, even from a simple farm animal, can move mountains and forgive the unforgivable." The legal proceedings that had once threatened to destroy the Morrison family had instead led to sweeping reforms in corporate accountability and animal protection laws. The Thunder Act, passed by the Texas legislature, established strict penalties for companies that used intimidation tactics against rural landowners and created new protections for working animals. Danny's career had evolved as well. Promoted to chief deputy sheriff, he now oversaw a K-9 program that paired rescued animals with officers dealing with PTSD. The success rate was remarkable. Men and women who had struggled for years with trauma found healing in the patient eyes and unconditional love of animals who had faced their own battles. "Animals don't judge your nightmares," Danny explained to a new group of veteran officers during orientation. "They just stand guard while you sleep and remind you that tomorrow is worth fighting for." The afternoon sun painted the ranch in shades of gold as the Morrison family gathered for their daily ritual. Thunder waited patiently while Jake climbed down from his broad back, then followed the family toward the barn where dinner was served. His movements were careful but purposeful, and his eyes tracked each family member with the devoted attention of a guardian who would never again forget who he was protecting. Thunder taught us that love multiplies when you share it, Sarah said, reading from the children's book she was writing about their experiences. Like light from a candle lighting another candle, love grows brighter when it touches other hearts. The newest addition to the ranch arrived as the family was settling Thunder for the night. Hope, a 6-month-old Brahmin calf from Thunder's bloodline, had been born with the same intelligent amber eyes and gentle temperament that had made her grandfather legendary. She approached Thunder with the fearless curiosity of youth, and the old bull welcomed her with the patient tolerance of an elder passing wisdom to the next generation. "She's got Thunder's eyes," Jake observed, watching Hope puzzle out how to open the gate latch just as Thunder had done years before. "And his brain, too." Dr. Hayes smiled as she watched the interaction. "The intelligence appears to be strengthening in each generation, but so is their emotional stability. Hope should have all of Thunder's remarkable abilities without the vulnerability to stress-induced breakdown." As night settled over the Morrison Ranch, the family gathered on the front porch, watching fireflies dance above the pasture where Thunder grazed peacefully beside his granddaughter. The bull who had saved a family, solved crimes, and changed laws now served as elder statesman to a new generation of extraordinary animals who would carry his legacy forward. "You know what the best part is?" Danny said, his arm around Sarah's expanding waist while Jake dozed against his grandfather's shoulder. "Thunder gets to see it all. He gets to watch Hope grow up, see the ranch flourish, know that his sacrifice led to something beautiful." Thunder lifted his massive head at the sound of his name, amber eyes reflecting the porch light as he gazed toward the family he had died to protect and lived to see prosper. His tail swished once in contentment, and he returned to his grazing, a gentle giant at peace in a world made better by his extraordinary love. In the distance, Hope's soft lowing mixed with the night sounds of the Texas hill country, a new voice added to the symphony of a sanctuary where intelligence and compassion had combined to create something miraculous, a place where animals and humans alike could heal, grow, and discover that the greatest strength comes not from power or vengeance, but from the simple act of standing guard over those we love. Thunder's story reminds us that life's greatest gifts often come wrapped in our deepest struggles. How many of us have felt like Danny, buried alive by circumstances beyond our control, facing illness, losing loved ones, watching dreams crumble? Yet Thunder shows us that love doesn't count the cost. This magnificent bull, bred for intelligence but blessed with an even rarer gift of unconditional devotion, teaches us that healing happens not in isolation, but in the sacred bonds we forge with those who refuse to give up on us. For those of us in our golden years, Thunder's legacy speaks to a profound truth. Our greatest impact often comes not from what we achieve, but from how we love, like Martha Morrison, who witnessed her family's near destruction transform into a sanctuary of hope. We discover that wisdom isn't just about surviving life's storms, it's about creating shelter for others. Thunder's granddaughter Hope represents what we all long for, the knowledge that our love continues, that our sacrifices bear fruit in future generations, that the light we kindle today will warm hearts long after we're gone. Share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a bond with an animal that changed your perspective on love and loyalty? What legacy of love are you building for the next generation in your family?